election, a lot of the damage that these communities are going to be dealing with will be damage that they're dealing with long after this storm is gone. And that's the wastewater, that's the toxic chemicals that have leached into the ground and into the water sources. That's the chemical fires. We saw a chlorine plant on fire in the days after Hurricane Laura. And none of this even really addresses what is perhaps one of the greatest environmental impacts of these storms, which is what the petrochemical facilities, the refineries, the industrial facilities do to prepare for the storm ahead of time, which is that they release huge amounts of air toxics into the air, chemicals like benzene, which causes cancer, nitrogen oxides, which cause respiratory diseases and illnesses, which of course is the last thing that we need in the time of this COVID pandemic. And, as is the case with so many of these environmental issues playing out across the country, when you start to peel back the layers, you see that the Trump administration has actually actively dismantled regulations that might have protected against some of these emissions. And in this case, the risk management program at EPA is something that the Obama administration has implemented and might have helped to implement plans to reduce these types of emissions. But of course, the Trump administration rolled that back.
Jake Levine and Dr. Peter Hotez, thank you both so much for sticking around, shedding a light on these really crucial issues right now. We need to get to some more breaking news out of Washington. We just learned within the last hour that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has informed the intelligence committees it will no longer offer in-person briefings about election security and foreign interference. Joining me now is our own Josh Letterman from the White House. Josh, just in the last few minutes since we last broke this story, we heard that this has to do with a fear of potential leaks.
Well, that's right. I spoke with an intelligence community official just a few minutes ago who said, look, we've been providing briefings to Congress on a regular basis since the 2018 election, and even more frequently in the last several months. Particularly in early August, there were briefings that the intelligence community gave to the House and Senate. And after that, there was information that was sensitive, potentially classified, we're not exactly sure, but at least sensitive information that managed to make its way into the public domain, into the press. And the speculation, or at least the argument that the intelligence community seems to be making, is that they can't totally trust Congress at this point in time to protect that information that is being conveyed in these in-person briefings. I think some of the concern also is about the back and forth between the administration and Congress playing out publicly. There were public comments from Nancy Pelosi and from other leaders in Congress following those briefings, talking about their dissatisfaction with the briefings and what was in them, what was not in them. And so now what the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, is telling to the House and Senate intelligence committees is they're going to continue to provide information to Congress about election interference and election security, but they are primarily going to do it through what they're calling written, finished intelligence products, which means instead of having kind of an open discussion where lawmakers would be able to ask questions and hear from officials firsthand about what they're picking up on, it's going to be more a matter of when the intelligence community has a final written product ready to be handed over to Congress, then they will do so. Now, importantly, the intelligence community is not totally closing the door to some in-person briefings, because there's actually some statutory requirements contained in the NDAA, the Defense Authorization Bill, that actually requires by law the Director of National Intelligence to do some briefings for Congress. So the Intelligence Office saying they are going to comply with everything that they are legally required to do. They want to keep the door open for communication with Congress, but in an attempt to try to protect this information better, as well as sources and methods used to collect that intelligence, the primary way that they are going to communicate with Congress about efforts to interfere in our election and efforts to secure the integrity of our election from now on will be through written, finished intelligence products.
NBC's Josh Letterman bringing us up to speed on the very latest at the White House. For more on this, I want to bring in Betsy Woodruff-Swan, national correspondent for Politico and an MSNBC contributor. And Betsy, you've got some more reporting on this.
It really relies heavily on partnership with tourism-based locations, so adventures of
is air conditioning. That is not happening right now because you've got 180,000 residents without power. And I can tell you for a fact that it is not only hot, it's extremely humid. And so, but as they said, the president pointed out as he was listening to the folks there explain that as bad as this devastation was, we did get lucky. I'm going to say we because I'm from Louisiana, and we were all saying novenas and praying for the folks of Lake Charles. New Orleans dodged a bullet. Unfortunately, we had 14 deaths. That is never a good thing when anyone perishes in any sort of natural disaster or otherwise. But you did hear the Governor John Bel Edwards and the others there in town saying it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a lot worse, and thank God it wasn't. I know, Eric, you've joined this conversation now as well.
You know what really strikes me, having covered hurricanes, and you were right, Arthel, our thoughts and prayers are with your family and all the residents of New Orleans and certainly Lake Charles and out in Texas. The president going to Texas now, and we will cover this live with the president all throughout this afternoon. One of the things that struck me was the officials saying that the hurricanes are coming with greater frequency and with more force. And one of the lessons that we have learned from 15 years ago with Katrina is being much better prepared. FEMA has 750 people, on the ground. The president made the point of all the meals that they have so far served. So it seems that one new role of the federal government is to be far better prepared for these hurricanes that have been really affecting the Gulf Coast and down in Texas than we had been in previous decades. And also, people are listening, as we know firsthand, having seen this, the damage. 580,000 people along the Gulf shore evacuated. They took this seriously. They were not having hurricane parties, as maybe some folks, as you mentioned, had in the past. People taking this threat seriously. It is real, it is here, and thankfully, the death toll was not greater, Arthel, I think, because of that.
Absolutely. So we are going to continue covering. The president is going to spend a little more time there in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and the surrounding areas. Then he's also going to go over to Texas because Texas, our beloved neighbor, also took a hit as well, right there on the border, the Louisiana-Texas border. And again, as bad as this was, it could have been worse, but we definitely feel for the people who were impacted by this. Some people lost their homes, people lost their livelihoods. This is something that will take years and sometimes an entire lifetime. Years to recover and a lifetime to adjust. I'm telling you what, you never ever really fully recover from something like this. On a financial, let me just finish, please, excuse me, on a financial level as well as an emotional level, Eric.
And you know it firsthand, having gone through them. I just wanted to point out that more than 200,000 people, 220,000 right now do not have running water. The electricity is out for so many, especially considering the hot, humid conditions there that will continue. So it's definitely a tough situation, and our thoughts are with the folks along the Gulf Coast. More live coverage.
We'll be back in about 45 minutes.
Start your day with Secret.
In other words, it's miserable. Very miserable down there right now. Sticky, humid.
Secret stop sweat 3 times.
Oh, am I the only one who says I'm fine? Yeah, I'm fine.
The health and safety of not only the elephants that
warrants that were out. The reason why he was shackled, you heard from the police chief here, they said that was standard procedure. That was a result of some outstanding warrants related to a third-degree sexual assault charge. Well, the family is disputing that. The family is saying that is a smear that you're hearing out there, and they're saying that they're just focused on his condition right now. They want the message to be focused on unity, uniting people. You see the crowd. He has a very diverse crowd, a very young crowd, and you see the message that is going to be leading the march as they make their way to the courthouse. It says justice for Jacob, and that's the message that people are having out here today. It's a very friendly vibe. We talked about the protests and the nature of these protests. We see a lot of kids out here. We see a lot of families. This is a very peaceful march that will be stepping off any minute now. Lindsay?
And Shaq, the reporting that I've heard so far is that Jacob Blake, while he's resting and he's recovering, is not aware at the movement that this whole incident has inspired. Do you know if that's still the case?
Well, yeah, that's the latest that we know. We heard that from his father, who said yesterday while he was in D.C. at the march on Washington, he said he's doing whatever he can to make sure that he's not upsetting his son. His son is still in a lot of pain, and that's something that the family continues to remind us of. He's still under that intense medical treatment. So, yes, he's able to talk and joke with his family, and they want to keep things positive, but they also say, and they acknowledge that they're shielding him from the larger aspects of this, the big movement that's there. They want to keep the positivity, and what they want him to be focused on the positive aspects of this entire focus right now. When that shifts, I think that depends on how well he recovers, how quickly he recovers. One thing that his uncle told us is that they're still asking for the family to come, or they're still asking for the nation, for people all around Kenosha and people all around the country to send their prayers his way. They emphasize he is not out of the woods yet. He's doing better. He's feeling better. He's alert and talking, but he still has a long road to recovery, so the prayers, they say, are still needed. Lindsay?
NBC's Shaq Brewster in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Thank you so much for your reporting, and we'll continue to check in with you at that protest happening right now in Kenosha. Meantime, a frightening scene unfolded in Germany earlier this morning. The streets of Berlin were swamped with protesters marching against the country's coronavirus restrictions and emboldened by the QAnon movement, whose influence is now spreading across Europe, as well as, of course, here in the United States. Joining us now with more on that is NBC's Matt Bradley. He's live from Berlin. And Matt, night has fallen. What can you tell us about how many people are still there and that QAnon influence that's growing overseas?
Yeah, it's startling, isn't it? I mean, the crowd is really spread out. There were tens of thousands of people here. Now there's a lot of stragglers around. This is Berlin, so it all kind of devolved into a sort of a techno dance party for a little while here. But, you know, that really doesn't do justice to what was going on here. This was a coronavirus skeptic rally that had some strong strains of the QAnon conspiracy and some of the supporters of that theory. Now, how did Europeans, people here who are not Democrats, they're not Republicans, they're for the most part not Americans, why would they care about the QAnon conspiracy theory? Well, for a lot of them, they arrived at it through their skepticism of the coronavirus and COVID. We see that throughout the world. People who were grating under the regulations that, ironically, here in Germany at least, played a major role in keeping this country from having so many terrible cases of this disease. But a lot of people were very suspicious of that, and that led them down a digital rabbit hole, looking at YouTube videos and chatting with people in chat rooms, and it led them to embrace a new theory, a decidedly American one, the QAnon theory. And I spoke to some of the protesters today. They were Germans, but they were carrying QAnon flags. Take a listen to what they had to say.
It's the same problem. It's the same agenda. It's a problem. We have a problem with the communists, and they are the same lies. They tell us coronavirus is a big problem, and we must go. We don't work.
The situation between the Germans, Americans, and Russians, French people. Yeah, this is the reason. Yeah. Okay. We are for the truth and the peace.
So, it's unusual. Why would Europeans care about this decidedly American phenomenon? Well, I spoke with some researchers. They said that anybody can see in this QAnon conspiracy theory kind of what they want to see. And it's just infinitely expandable and adaptable to other countries. It doesn't have to be an American conspiracy because, of course, if you're familiar with this conspiracy theory, it sort of imagines a global cabal of elites who are running the world. For people here in Europe, that's something that they can see, that they can resonate with. Back to you.
NBC's Matt Bradley live in Berlin. Very interesting, Matt. Thank you. After the break, more on the hurricane recovery effort from a man who knows it well. General Russell Honore joins us live.
Shan, she's the matriarch of the
contrast on the economy, on policies and on social order in the streets and so on to really change the narrative of the race?
I don't know. Improvement here with the air quality. The issue of showing Trump
differently than he does when he's trying to motivate his base. If you
And where she finished, she came out.
Then buyer today's half price sale. Get $2,400 of flooring.
In mapping navigation routes in coastal and shoal water areas, and help control silting in major harbors and navigable rivers. Ultimately, spaceborne instrumentation may permit observations of the wave heights of our oceans. Although it will not be possible to acquire all of the needed Earth resources data by sensors located directly in the satellites, it is possible to supplement the information by placing surface instruments, such as buoys, water gauges, and strain gauges, at strategically located positions on the surface of the Earth. These surface instruments could transmit the data to satellites, which would then relay it to central data handling stations. The Nimbus weather satellite is playing a role in ecology right now. A recording system on Nimbus was developed for an animal tracking experiment. Scientists attached a specially instrumented collar on an elk in western Wyoming. As Nimbus flies over, it receives information about the elk's condition and location, and reports back to Earth. Accurate tracking of free-roaming animals in their natural environment will increase scientific knowledge of animal migration habits, and may show ways to help protect our wildlife population. This is Skylab, America's first manned experimental space station. It will be launched into orbit around the Earth in 1972. There are several Earth observation experiments planned for the orbiting space station. One of the men who hopes to be flying in Skylab is scientist-astronaut Dr. William Lenore. He too is interested in Earth resources.
One of the more interesting
Well, that's old footage.
Be furious. That's going to ripple through.
Any win. Well, as long as win means now. Today is the day.
Vital source of income.
Be able to win it in the final weeks.
Okay, what about this outreach to African American voters and to winning back women and voters in the suburbs? We don't have a lot.
I had one of the preppy boys say, hey, like, we
go surveying the damage in this small community and others throughout the Gulf Coast during Hurricane Laura. He is now on his way to Orange, Texas to continue his tour of the damage. We are joined now by Lieutenant General Russell Honore, someone who is unfortunately all too familiar with the devastation a hurricane like this can bring. Lieutenant General, thank you for joining us. First, I want to get your reaction to the president's remarks this afternoon. He toured some of the hardest hit areas. We're showing our viewers now some of that video. What are your thoughts on what we heard from the president today? Yeah, we're trying to get Lieutenant General Honore. Are you there? Can you hear me? As we watch again. Okay, great. So what did you take from the president's remarks today surveying the damage?
Well, his comments always are all the president. Give the people reassurance. Tell them we're going to help you. We're going to get everything you need to do. Unfortunately, that comes very slow for the people who are trying to get back in their home. And I hope the president is sincere when he talks about the support that's going to come from FEMA and from the federal government, because it will have to re-establish the grid in that town. And I hope he means it when he said he's going to get it done quickly, because here's why. The homes after Harvey have not been rebuilt. The homes in Puerto Rico after Maria has not rebuilt. And Virgin Islands. So I hope this promise of speedy help is going to come, because since 2017, when he took office, those homes have not been rebuilt. So I hope he's true to his word, and he's going to make this happen and give us everything we need to rebuild Lake Charles and the entire spectrum from Cameron all the way up to Shreveport. People that took damage.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of families without power. What does this area need in the immediate future? I mean, when we talk about rebuilding, that sounds like such a daunting task. You almost don't know where to begin. So what do these people need right now, immediately?
That's a good question, because you got to reestablish the grid. Get the roads open. That's happening while they're doing search and rescue. Get the cell towers up so people can talk. You can't communicate, you can't coordinate. Then start getting the electricity back on. Get power generated through the water pumps so they can start pumping water so people can have clean water, those that are in their home, or they have access to water in the town without having to ship as much bottled water. And number three, porta potties. Porta potties everywhere. People are going to come back and they're going to need those services. And with the number of houses and buildings that's constructed, they're going to have to put street blocks of porta potties in there in the coming days. Otherwise, they'll end up with sick. And get everybody a tetanus shot, because of the amount of debris around there. People get sick if they don't give them updated tetanus shots. But you got to rebuild the grid, literally, to get the lights back on and get the water running, and probably put a field hospital in there to assist, because most of the other small clinics are down, and you're going to need medical services. But we're really rebuilding the infrastructure.
Lieutenant Honore, today is the 15th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. You were the former Katrina Joint Task Force commander. I mean, that storm devastated New Orleans. It also claimed nearly 2,000 lives. Are we better equipped 15 years later to deal with emergencies and response plans to crises like this?
I'd say we are. We have a better structure at the federal government. It's much more responsive in getting the presidential declarations done. And that generally worked well with the search and rescue. After the search and rescue, we go into recovery. That's when the bureaucracy kick in. You get, in a year, you could have 2 different administrators for FEMA on the ground making decisions. It's ridiculous. It's about logistics now. And it's up to the state now to execute that logistics, to reestablish that grid with help from the federal government. Much of this work will be done by contractors. So they have to clear the way to get those contractors in to help them reestablish the grid. The other big difference from Katrina with Louisiana is the Louisiana National Guard is home. And they have made a big difference. They've been the silent hand and success in saving lives, because when Katrina hit, the Louisiana National Guard was in Iraq on patrol. They're here, and you can see the difference. They're all over that disaster zone, and they're saving people's lives. So that is a big difference from what we had in Katrina to what we have now.
Well, we are glad to hear it. And Lieutenant General Russell Honore, quickly before I let you go, how's your home? Was your area affected?
We had the threat of tornadoes, and I feel for the people who've lost their home, and my heart goes out to the first responders, many of them coming in, volunteers from all over the country to kind of try to help out people here in Louisiana. And I want to thank them and the NGOs that's coming in to help. Thank you.
And thank you so much for your time today, sir. We appreciate it. Still ahead, what's next for Kenosha? The police shooting of Jacob Blake has sparked vigils and protests across the country. We'll take a closer look at the legal side of this and the possible fate of the officers involved.
Find your keys. Excitement of anticipation. You know what I mean? That feeling.
Maintaining order around these protests is that they're leaderless. They're happening in a spontaneous way. So there's no top-down approach to it. There's little organization. And oftentimes this is just people taking to the streets Some of them peacefully protesting, but many of them engaging in looting and in starting fires and really destroying property. And it's very difficult to deal with. I think to their credit, Democrats in Wisconsin have come out and said, we can't tolerate this kind of disorder. And that's certainly more than what's happened in places like Seattle or Portland.
How extensive was the damage in Kenosha? I saw clips of some buildings, some businesses being burned to the ground.
Yeah, earlier this week, Kenosha News, the local newspaper, was reporting that about 30 businesses had either been damaged or destroyed. This is a town of only 100,000, so that's significant. It's a hit to the community. And I've got to give Jacob Blake's mother a lot of credit for calling out, saying this doesn't represent our family. This is not productive, and to really pray for healing.
You mentioned that Governor Evers called in the National Guard, but was he too slow to do that? I know he just had a relatively small number of guardsmen come in the first night, but now there are more, correct?
Correct. They're bringing them in from other states. This is something that happened at the request of local politicians. And I think this is important because people are rightly concerned about what happened. The video is certainly disturbing. There are a lot of details emerging around this, but when you have looting, when you have rioting, when you have arson around this, it only makes it more complicated to investigate. Much less pursue justice. And I think protesters really made a wrong move here by targeting the Kenosha courthouse. That's a symbol of justice that could be upheld.
Jillian, this seems to be resonating around the country more than, say, the protests even in Seattle or Portland have, in the sense that it seems to be influencing the political conversation. Why do you think that is, that this one is making a difference?
Well, I mean, Portland and Seattle are known for their progressivism. They're known for being a little liberal and a little nutty sometimes. But I think when you've got a town of 100,000 in a state that's not known for being super far left, seeing this happen, it really drives home that it could happen in any community. And I think politicians are rightly concerned about this. This is something that doesn't reflect well in the Democratic Party. Many Democratic politicians have been far too tolerant of this behavior, slow to condemn it. And it's a point that Republicans have brought up. And so I think there's a need for Democrats to respond to it right now.
Dan, this is Joe Biden, you saw, spoke up. Kamala Harris spoke up. Are Democrats figuring out that they may have a vulnerability here after not saying a word about any of this at the Democratic convention?
I guess so. I mean, they do have a vulnerability. I have to say, Paul, I was pretty astonished that we got all the way through the Democratic convention without a single speaker addressing these urban violent, not only the violent urban protest, but the extraordinary rise in black-on-black crime in inner city neighborhoods, murders, for instance. They didn't bring up any of that. And now the Kenosha is on fire, and indeed there was looting in Minneapolis again in the last several nights. The Saks store, Nordstrom's, Target, they were hitting Minneapolis again. It is kind of a day late and a dollar short for the Democrats, and especially Joe Biden, to be criticizing it. And I think they have been afraid somehow that with the rise of the left in the Democratic Party, younger voters, the Black Lives Matter movement in which they've affiliated themselves, that they were going to somehow alienate this kind of section of the Democratic base. I think that's been a poor calculation. That's been a mistake, and I think they're probably going to pay a price for it, Paul. It's a little late at this point to finally say you're condemning this extraordinary violence.
Kyle, let me ask you about another event, which was the harassment of Senator Rand Paul and his wife as they left the White House after the Thursday convention event. What do you think the resonance of that is politically?
Well, I think there's huge political resonance. I mean, there has been this trend in protest movements in the last few years to harass people who are out at restaurants, politicians if they're seen there. And I think that really grates on people. I mean, they see the videos of protesters, up in the faces of a U.S. senator or up in the faces of, elderly women who are leaving an event, and I think they're outraged.
Yeah, all right. Going to be fascinating to watch how this plays. Still ahead, Democratic presidential.
This is what happens. All this chaos. This is what happens whenever a nation turns its back on God and it becomes what we have become just within the past 30 years. Chaos is on our streets. And if it's not natural catastrophes pertaining to fires, floods, tornadoes, hurricanes, etc., then we got the disease, and now we've got heavy protesting going on basically all over this countryside. It ain't just going on in one or two towns. And like they was talking about the town where George Floyd died at, they hit it again. So this is routinely going on everywhere, and if it's not hit your neighborhood yet, more than likely it will, just like the Walmart slogan, coming near a neighborhood near you. Whenever the politicians realizes that they have failed the American people, that's whenever we will see change, true change, pertaining to how things is run and operated here in America, pertaining to our court judicial justice system. Until then, the only thing that people like myself can do is document these matters and put out our voice to our viewers in telling them how we have translated this and how that we have transliterated this into what's actually occurring and why it's occurring. Once more, the Bible is very clear in stating that these will be the times of perilous times that shall fall upon humanity, just as a woman travailing, giving forth a child, pertaining to the sin and the wickedness of society. Whenever the sin and the wickedness of society gets on this level, you will not only hear about it, you will not only see it, but you will feel it, and you possibly may experience it. Because these are all the beginnings of God's sorrows that will fall upon to humanity in these last days. These are the signs that Jesus talked about that are very clear in what we've been experiencing this year in 2020, which will probably be one of the most costliest years that America has ever had to encounter since it has become a great nation. If we do not render to these signs, take heed to these warnings, they will only escalate and grow worse in various areas. We must listen and hearken to the voice of God, to the teachers and the ministers putting out the message similar towards what I'm putting out right now, towards repent, and turn from your sinful and wicked ways. We must do that if we're going to survive as a society. Thank you. Coming from the Windmill Ministries here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 38255. And once more, as we always end our message, good luck. Good luck to all of us, and yes, shalom.